Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Down, buddy.
I think we are actually good to go. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is April 13th, 2023. It's 2:00 p.m., and this is panel 17873 entitled Adapting to Climate Change. I'm Paula Mabee. I'm the Chief Scientist and Observatory Director of the National Ecological Observatory Network, which is headquartered here in Boulder, and I am very pleased and honored to be the moderator of the panel today. So I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Today we would like to acknowledge that Boulder is on ancestral homelands in an unceded territory of Indigenous peoples who have traversed, lived in, and stewarded lands in the Boulder Valley since time immemorial. These indigenous nations include the Apache, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Comanche, Pawnee, Shoshone, Sioux, and Ute. A little bit about this panel. So we'll reserve 15 to 20 minutes at the end of this panel discussion for questions and answers. We're using a note card system to receive questions from the audience. So this is how this works. So first of all, if you'd like to pose a question, and we'd like you all to pose questions, especially the students, simply raise your hand at any time during the session to request a note card and a pencil from one of our producers. Where are our producers? There are producers. They're raising their hands in the back and up front here. Please write legibly. Writing is hard these days. Okay. If you're a student, please note this on your question in the card. And when you finish writing your question, raise your hand to hand it back to a moderator. And they'll bring it up to me, to the producer. I urge everyone to please make your questions brief and to the point, and I probably won't be able to answer all the questions that are submitted, so I'll merge them together as appropriate and I'll give it a try. So, all right, now we can get started. Today we're very fortunate to have 4 panelists representing different perspectives on adaptation to climate change. We have an ecologist, a policy analyst, a specialist in tribal engagement, and an urban planner. And all of these folks have just amazing experience and expertise, a lot of passion for our planet, and they excel at action and bringing people together. So I'd like to provide a very brief introduction to all of them, and then they're going to give their own opening remarks and fill in all the great stuff. So I thought I would begin here with Brian Miller. Can you raise your hand there? You're Brian. So Brian is a research ecologist with the United States Geological Survey. He works at the North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center, one of the 9 regional centers in the US, and he's also a co-organizer of the Indigenous Phenology Network. He has an interdisciplinary background in the social and ecological sciences, which he uses to plan scenarios and develop ecological simulations to help his partners understand climate change impacts and the options for adaptation. Brian's research is currently focused on Colorado and the surrounding region, but I noticed that it previously included similar work in East Africa and the Galapagos. That's Brian. Shauna Udvardy. Shauna is the Senior Climate Resilience Policy Analyst with the Climate and Energy Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists in DC. She develops regulatory and legislative comments, testimony, and policy proposals relating to climate impacts, such as extreme heat, wildfires, and flooding, I noted that she has particular expertise in flood management. Her analyses inform, build support, influence policymakers to advance climate resilience-related legislation and regulation, essentially all for the purpose of adapting to climate change impacts. And she has a background in international relations as well as ecology and sustainable community development. And I noted that she was in the Peace Corps in Nicaragua following her education. So, James Rattling is a specialist in tribal engagement. He's a research associate at the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences, or CIRES, at UC Boulder, as well as the tribal engagement specialist for the North Central Climate Adaptation Center. He's currently chair of the Ecological Society of America Traditional Ecological Knowledge Section. He's a member of South Dakota's Rosebud Sioux Tribe. As a tribal engagement specialist, his focus is on the development of programs at the interface of Indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge and Western science. And he's been active in developing Indigenous engagement strategies for many organizations over the years. He has over 25 years of experience working with the U.S. federal government, higher education, various nonprofits to develop and maintain effective working relationships with tribes, tribal colleges, universities, and tribal communities. And finally, we have Korkut Onaran. Korkut is an urban planner, architect, teacher, and scholar with a broad knowledge of environmental systems and regulation cultures and an educational background in architecture and environmental studies. He teaches at the University of Colorado Denver's College of Architecture and Planning. He co-founded Pelona Architects and Urbanists in 2010. It's a company which factors our individual lifestyles in relation to the global environment. So they specialize in good urbanism, didn't know those words before, and offer code writing, master planning, urban design, and architectural services. He's one of the leading founders of the Colorado chapter of Congress for the New Urbanism, and he explores practical ways of creating resilient communities in the face of the climate crisis. I discovered that Korkut has won prizes not only in architectural competitions, but also in poetry competitions. And so with that, I will let them elaborate on all of these things. So I'd like to invite them to give their own opening remarks. And why don't I start with you, Korkut?
Sure. Do you hear me? Is this good? I've started to focus on climate change and what we're going to do in a way that is within my own discipline. That is to say, as an urban planner, how can I prepare for climate crisis? And when I ask that question, there are several things that kind of scares me. If I lose my power, I'm doomed. If I lose my water, if garbage starts not being picked up, if sewage system fails, these are all doomsday scenarios. And if I cannot find some essential goods and services around me, if I'm isolated, if access is blocked. And that's something we keep seeing in the big storms and crises. That is to say, regional systems tend to break. Even temporarily, they shut down. The supply routes are blocked. So with that group of us, the Congress for the New Urbanism, we started asking questions and discussed a lot, did some workshops. I recently came up with this book. It's not, unfortunately, sold on the desk, but nowadays it's so easy to get books. You can get this. What we try to do here is to look at two things. One, localization of sustenance systems, meaning energy, water, food, waste management, and essential goods and services. If we can localize these, imagine a world where in the close vicinity you have alternative energy sources not just household scale, the panels, but maybe your block has an energy source like a solar farm. Maybe your neighborhood has one. And then comes the regional system. And we said, these need to nest within each other. That is to say, if the larger regional scale goes down, neighborhood supplies. If neighborhood goes down, block supplies, and then the household. Same thing about the water. I mean, these ideas are not new. Through the history, human societies live that way. If you go to Venice, for instance, you have the wells, you have the block size water storages, and then the city size, and then you start to get regional supplies. Right now, we created a world where household and regional supply are the only scales. We need intermediate supply systems. We're doing so-so about food because there's a lot of urban agriculture movement trying to grow food in different scales. But especially in terms of energy, water, waste, we're really doing really bad with waste because we have only one system, and the sewage systems. And comes the last item, essential services and goods. If I can get, I'll always tell this to my students as well, COVID hit, I had some dental problems. Luckily, my kitty corner neighbor was a dentist, and he took care of me. Now, that service becomes very essential when you're isolated. That is to say, you need a doctor, you need a lot of essential services. So that brings us to idea of a zoning reform. That is to say, A, we need households. That's another thing. How am I doing in terms of the time? I can go hours.
One more minute.
One more minute. Yeah. We are really pushing for zoning reform where a lot of these small services can be included in the neighborhoods. Imagine a subdivision. How many people, like 1,000 people lives there? Imagine the amount of professional service providers living in there and working somewhere else. If we can capture, let's say, 4 hours of their week in the community to provide that service in the community, in that neighborhood, in that subdivision, you create a hyper-local economy that can really provide a lot of resilience for our lifestyles. And there are ways to get there. There are ways to reform our zoning ordinances and allow that to happen. Thank you.
Thanks. James?
Yes. Haumi dakia pichante western napeshi zapolo. James Rattling fimacha pinasi changu lukoto oyate hemataha. From my heart, I greet you with a handshake. I am known as James Rattling, and I am a member of the Rosewood Sioux Tribe, and it was my language and the importance of language. Did you know that we are in the 5th year of the decade of indigenous languages designated by the United Nations? So there's this effort for 10 years to restore, strengthen indigenous languages. And I begin that way because I was asked to speak about action. And as a tribal member, I have the tremendous opportunity to work with my own tribe, which is not easy sometimes. I'd rather work with other people sometimes. You know that reality, but I get the privilege to work with them. And so my journey, so to speak, in this world of climate change began in 1999 when I went to the first, I was invited to the first National Climate Assessment meeting in Atlanta, Georgia. And there I was bombarded by data, bombarded by science, bombarded by a discussion of the Hadley model versus the Canadian model. It was all dominated by modelers. These are the solution to climate change was the modelers at that time. And I didn't see a role for us. I didn't see a role for me. What does this all mean? But for the last 20 years, I've been working in and out of the climate space and working with communities, both tribal and non-tribal, to advance a better understanding of what's happening to our world. And so 2 years ago, I was asked by my tribe to join something called the Chicunga Climate Crisis Working Group. And so 2 years ago, they asked me to join this group of resource manager leaders on Rosebud. to figure out how we're going to address climate change from a local tribal level. And because I worked at CU, and I want to acknowledge CU and all the partners here for working with us as partners, but also working to strengthen our relationships to do the work that was required. So we were able to secure funding from the Bureau of Indian Affairs Climate Resilience Program to help start a plan. About $250,000 it was, and to help start a plan. And basically, we built a team of scientists and elders, community leaders, tribal leaders, built that team to develop and address a plan. And so about a year ago, we completed the plan, and we did that during the COVID era. So think about that for a while. We never had no face-to-face meetings. We did it all by Zoom. We did it all by information we could find. But it was the best we could do at the time. And so we produced this plan. And I think, I want to share some of the things on that plan that we looked at. Again, the culture was front and center on this plan. The Lakota culture was front and center. And we used the term Unchi Maka, or Mother Earth, was the first and foremost thing that what we do is we got to protect and sustain Mother Earth. So how could one, little tribe in South Dakota really think about global things like that? But we did. And our elders, our spiritual leaders led us down that way. He said, this is how we got to start, James. This is how we got to start working group from that global level, from our spiritual level. So that was our guiding principles, if you will, of how we did the work. And then we recruited climate scientists from NC CASC and others around the country that wanted to work with us on this plan. So they helped us gather data, local data, what was best available information, and we learned that our tribe needs better data on itself. Another outcome from that plan. And then we started looking at natural hazards and things that are happening and what are people saying about natural hazards. Well, this past year, if you followed South Dakota weather, we had tremendous snowstorms. And one of them made national news because the snow was so much, the wind was so high that it just covered all the roads, knocked down our power lines, and again, it demonstrated that we're not really ready for this kind of weather, this kind of climate change that we're seeing. So our people suffered. People had health conditions that couldn't see the doctor, young people who were sick, and plus we couldn't get access to food. All the grocery stores in a rural South Central South Dakota, when the trucks couldn't move, there was nothing to eat. And then, as I mentioned, the electrical lines went down. So if families didn't have wood stoves and have wood, they suffered, they struggled. And so in some ways, that event reminded us, and we didn't say, look, see what happens if you don't plan for climate. We didn't do that. But we paid attention to the people's needs. Our planning process was built from the ground up, built with, as I mentioned, those kind of people in our community who want to contribute to this plan. As it turned out, the BIA was releasing a new program called the Implementation of Climate Plans. So we got ours passed by our Tribal Council, which is our primary governing body. They said, we like the plan, thank you for the plan, what's next? Well, we have to implement the plan. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, it takes money. Well, who's going to give us money? Is it CU Boulder? No. The City of Boulder? No. It was a BIA again. So they had this new program. So it was a $2 million program. So we put our team together, we wrote to that, and we won that next round of funding. So we're going to build some kind of a center, a focal point for climate planning, climate resilience for our tribe. And what's interesting about this approach is if you know our culture and our history is, I know they use the word Sioux in Atlantic acknowledgement, I kind of cringe. You guys see my face kind of go like this? It's really not our word for ourselves, but I understand, we're on that pathway to understand each other better. But we have something called the Ocheti Shankoe, which is in our own language, 7 Council Fires. And that's a regional consortium, if you will, of our people, the Great Sioux Nation. That's how they were popular vernacular called us, the Great Sioux Nation. Treaties and those agreements with the government, Great Sioux Nation. But they broke us up. And diminished our strength and our power, and they broke us up. So that's what we have now. There are these fragments of the Great Sioux Nation. But we're still here. And so what we proposed with this new center and this new plan was an example to the people, to the Oyate, that it can be done, first of all. That climate is important and we gotta do our part to plan and to bring people along. Second part is that we have an implementation project, right? So we're gonna do something with this center. We're gonna do things that are required. And the third part, we're gonna share that with our great Sioux Nation. So Oceti Sakowin, in my mind, is gonna be this regional configuration of our people, all based on responding and responding to climate, but also offering solutions. So my last point will be is this. We're gonna have a youth component to this. We're gonna have a climate ambassador program to this new configuration of the Oceti Sakowin climate. And we're really excited that that's the direction we're going. There's 17 tribes in that. 17 tribes in that Oceti Sakowin. So you can imagine what can be. We do this well, we do this right, and in partnership. So we welcome partnerships. We welcome those entities that want to work with us on this, and we look forward to that. So I'll stop there and thank you for your time. Wopi Latanka, Chichapalo. Thank you all very much.
Shauna.
I'm so inspired by your comments, and I think that what you've just described to us is sort of a wonderful inspiration. I think could be a model for, how we can envision solutions, and it's just really cool to hear. So again, I'm from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and you can imagine we've been really busy in the climate and energy program, as you heard, and I'm working on climate impacts. And the Union of Concerned Scientists grounds the work we do in policy on science. So we do our own technical analyses, and within the last 5 years, we've produced 2 major reports. A few on sea level rise and thinking about not when infrastructure or land is completely underwater, but when tidal flooding is going to be so frequent, it's going to be chronic. So that report is called Underwater. More recently, we did a report looking at climate change and how it's going to impact people and farmers and outdoor workers as far as extreme heat, and how extreme heat is going to be very dangerous into the future. And we looked at temperature and humidity, because that's the feels like temperature. And that's what's so dangerous, is if we have that humidity and high temperatures, it can be killer heat, and that's the name of the report. And I mention these reports because they're, as I said, grounded in science. We also did some mapping program with this, GIS, as many of the students may be working on, called Story Maps. And so you can look at these different climate projections of tidal flooding and go down to your county or zip code level and see how it's going, if you're living on the coast, see how it's going to affect your family or your neighbors, et cetera. But we also looked at tax base, and so you can see how it'll impact tax base. And we have a lot of resources like that to kind of bring science down to the local level, so then you can go and advocate for what you want. And then the extreme heat, as I said, we also have a mapping program that shows what those results are going to be now and into the future. But both of those analyses come with, so that's, we pretty much focus on doom and gloom, right? I mean, that's kind of the science we do, and it gets tough every day, but we do bring solutions. And for each of these reports, what we looked at is, what if we keep temperatures down to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, or keep warming at bay? How much of the sea level rise, how much of that tidal flooding would we not see? And so we did that math, we did that analysis and that technical analysis. So you can see that on the mapping programs. And we also put that down to a congressional district, and the folks on the Hill love seeing data at that local level, and it's much more powerful that way. And so we can say, if we act now or yesterday, these are the houses that will be spared from this type of chronic flooding, this type of tidal flooding. We did the same thing with extreme heat. And so I think this is the kind of analysis that we hope is going to help move that conversation forward. But one way we like to think about climate resilience is, it is the way, is we think about it as, adaptation on the one hand, and then mitigation on the other. So we need to bring those two pieces together because we need mitigation or reducing emissions to stop making things worse, right? And we need adaptation to be able to be more resilient into the future to these types of extreme impacts. So what has UCS been doing over the last few Congresses, over the last few years is, as you may know, the big issue for a lot of environmental organizations was getting these infrastructure bills passed in Congress. So we worked very hard to get both of the bipartisan infrastructure law passed as well as the Inflation Reduction Act passed, and these were huge for climate change. It's been so long since we've seen any action by Congress on this. So it was bipartisan and a big push by many folks. The bill, or the bipartisan infrastructure law, has $46 billion in funding for climate resilience. That's huge. So we're going to see this type of funding, and we also have funding in the IRA bill. Also, the IRA bill was huge for climate change because it had emission reduction measures like energy tax credits and funding for renewables. So both of these bills were huge, and we're going to see that funding come out in the next, it's already getting rolled out, right? But in the next 5 to 10 years, the IRA bill is going to be a little bit longer. So the White House has guidebooks online on the bill law, so you can see where some of the money is already going and to what. So where are we right now? We're working on, as I said, since it's going to take 5 to 10 years to really see these kind of projects get implemented, we're working on making sure those projects and the administration and the agencies are getting the money out in an equitable way. So we want a lot of these funds to go towards tribal nations and towards the more underserved communities. And then we're also working in this Congress on getting a bill called the National Climate Adaptation and Resilience Strategy. So guess what? Under the White House, we have no one organizing unit that organizes how we think about climate resilience and adaptation at the national level. So this bill, NCARS, would put, for the first time, an Office of Climate Adaptation and Resilience under the White House and would establish a resilience officer under the White House. And the reason why I'm excited about it is, first, it's long overdue, right? But second, let's get a handle on where all these funds are going for climate resilience, and let's track and see what the difference it's making. And we just need to be able to, as we just heard, we need to be able to learn from each other. And if we don't have one office that can really consolidate this learning and understanding, then we're really not going to be able to do the best we can with funds. I'm going to stop there because I feel like I might go on forever. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to start by thanking the organizers and also Dave Tezzi, who I know couldn't be here today, but for bringing me in. Fortunate to be on the panel with everyone here. So, as was stated in my intro, I'm an ecologist. That can mean a lot of different things, both within sort of the federal service where I sit, but more broadly, of course, as well. And so I want to give a little bit more of a flavor of the kind of work that I do as an ecologist and others in our network. And I'll just point out, in case you didn't catch it, that actually James and I are sort of operating in the same network, what we call the CASCs, which stands for Climate Adaptation Science Centers. And that's actually why they separated James and I.
We like to arm wrestle.
Yeah.
For more money.
Yeah. But so what I do, what others in my network do is, or our mission is to deliver science to help fish, wildlife, people, water, land adapt to a changing climate. And that's quite a broad mandate. But for me, what that generally means is working directly with natural and cultural resource managers, tribes, and at Department of the Interior bureaus like the National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, others, to help them sort of understand what climate change impacts might look like for their particular place, whether it's their community or their Park Service unit or whatever it might be, and then to think about their adaptation options. And that can be a daunting task. And part of the reason for that, of course, is the uncertainty of climate change. And I think that's something we should acknowledge and talk more about. That's my bias. But and what do I mean by that? Of course, there's broad agreement that temperatures will continue to rise. We'll see more extreme events. I think those things are pretty well baked in and broadly acknowledged. But when you think about that from the standpoint of someone who is perhaps managing, livestock or wildlife or whatever it might be at a particular location, that information in and of itself isn't particularly useful for sort of guiding how they might make their day-to-day decisions and also plans for further out into the future. And so one of the things that we do is to sort of unpack the uncertainty of climate change in terms of, well, how much warmer might it get in a particular place? Or, for some areas, we don't necessarily know with great certainty if we might see more or less precipitation in a given year or a given season. And that doesn't mean that we have to be paralyzed by that uncertainty or sort of throw our hands up and go, well, there's nothing we can do. On the contrary, we have some tools that can help folks to kind of consider that broad range of uncertainty and boil it down to just a handful of sort of more approachable, small number of potential futures that they might face, and plan for those. And one of the tools that I can talk more about as we go through the panel is scenario planning and other tools like that to help folks unpack that uncertainty, deal with it, address it, and then feel prepared for the future. I think, and it's not just climate change. Of course, just planning for the future in general is fraught with uncertainty. I think just taking a sort of a step back and realizing, we're not great at predicting the future. So let's use the tools that we have to get the best information we have, look at that broad range of potential conditions, and plan around those. So happy to talk about that more through the course of the panel if there's time and interest, but I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, well, one of the things I noticed in everything that was said here is there's local action, so local urban planning, local tribal planning, data at the local level that you mentioned was very compelling for lawmakers, and then working with local resource managers. So in listening to this, I'm wondering essentially what you think, and they all sound like very successful levels at which to work. And I'm wondering what you think the biggest impediments are. So I'd be very interested in hearing that.
Oh, I'll take it. I'll start.
And by the way, as we chat, if anybody has any questions, especially students, raise your hand, get a card, and they'll be moved up this way.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you. It's a good question. For us, with the tribe, if you know our tribe, we're one of the larger population tribes and also one of the larger land bases. So what that means is that we have a lot of issues, important issues, social, cultural, economic. So you go before let's say you're the tribal council. Here comes James Rattling, right? Wants to talk about climate change, and he brings Brian Miller along. Will Brian be helpful? Maybe, I don't know. I'm kidding. But we go before council, right? So before I got on the agenda, they were talking about housing. Before that, housing was meth addiction on Rosebud. Before that, it was youth incarceration. Before that was healthcare and not enough funding. We're going to run out of healthcare. That's what those guys got to deal with, and women got to deal with every day. And here I come, with my trusted science buddies and all that, saying, hey, we got this great idea for the tribe, right? We want to work with you to address climate change. And so that's the reality that I work in, that we work in with tribal governments like that. Not all tribes are the same. They're different, but I'm just telling you our experience that. So it's trying to relate and help them understand what we're talking about when we talk about climate adaptation or climate mitigation or greenhouse gases, or we're all going to get electric cars if Uncle Joe Biden will give it to us. But so it's just really trying to connect For instance, and how we did that was that in our planning and in our engagement with the communities, we have 20 communities that make up the tribe, spread across 4 counties in south central South Dakota. We're all spread out. And so we had to try to connect some thinking behind what's really important to the community right now. And one of the things that rose to the top was pollution. The communities wanted a cleaner place, a less dangerous place to live, for their children and grandchildren to run around and play, and aesthetically and culturally better. I never thought that would be rise to the top. The second one was health. The health conditions and what's a rising temperature going to do to communities in a tribe that has inadequate housing, meaning doesn't heat very well, doesn't cool very well, and all those other related issues. So for us, it was working with leadership. We all have influencers in our tribe and our community that if he says yes, if she says no, and she's more influential, no matter how good a case you make about climate, they're going to listen to her. So we had to, that's why I mentioned that time I was working in 1999. It's taken 20 plus years to move our tribe to see climate be a priority and to connect that. And so we also had to connect that to jobs, right? We're still have a high unemployment rate. So we had to figure out with this new center, this new purpose, can we repurpose our people? Can we retrain them, retool them and for this new world and with climate? And so we had to do that. And the other thing is it takes time. Right? We don't think about time, right? We have grant cycles and reports and stuff, but it's how do we, as those that think it's really important, as a tribal member, telling grandma that we got to do this. I need your support. I need you to participate in this stuff. So a lot of it was relationship building. A lot of it was acknowledging the culture. We relate it to culture, right? If it's too hot, it's going to affect this, it's going to affect that. Can we still practice our spiritual ways if it's too hot? If this resource is going to go away because of temperature or because of precipitation or lack thereof. So those are things that we try to do with our work, but we acknowledge that those were pretty important barriers, but we had to address them. We didn't just try to roughshod over them. We're still working on that. And I think that's part of it too, is that the work doesn't end with the center, it doesn't end with the plan. Because things change, right? Plans need to change. So anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead. No, I'll follow you.
Okay. So yeah, I just maybe building a little bit on James's remarks, maybe picking up on some threads that he was really touching on around relating sort of climate change and its impacts to the things that whether it's a community or a refuge or whatever it is that they care about and are dealing with in sort of very real, tangible ways, versus coming in and saying, hey, here's the climate science, or here's the data that we have. Instead, sort of, I think working from the ground up is really important, and of course that takes a lot of capacity. So getting to your question around the challenges, I mean, to do that, you have to take the time to understand a given place, resources, community, whatever it might be, and of course doing so depends on relationships and building sort of trust and understanding of what folks are dealing with. So that's maybe one thing that I'll know. And then I think related to that is then as as a scientist, as we say, okay, well, I think I understand your issue, and I'm going to go back to my desk and kind of connect what I know about climate change to your resources or your issues that you care about, to go a step further and not just sort of develop the information and hand it over and go, here you go, but to build it directly into the plans that people are already developing, the planning processes that they're already undertaking, as opposed to just sort of developing, okay, here's my standalone, climate change sort of plan, but to say, well, you're already working on a water management plan or something like that. Let's build the climate science directly into that, so that when you go and you're developing your water management plan or whatever it might be, it's already baked in that you have thought about climate change and its impacts versus, oh, I got to go look at the climate change report in addition to figuring out my water planning process. So that mainstreaming, again, it takes time, resources, and careful thinking around how do you do that without burdening the people who are already quite strapped with developing that water management plan. Probably the last thing that they want is to have more work on their desk. So anyway, I think thinking carefully about what are people's issues and what are their planning processes and decisions, and understanding those deeply enough to embed the climate science directly into their existing processes.
Do you want to go? Okay, thanks. Well, impediments. I can go hours about impediments, but I'm just going to start. I said localization, but also the key word is self-sufficiency in the local level. So we created in the United States a metropolitan pattern that is exactly opposite of that. We created something most vulnerable. And the reason of that is, a lot of cultures come to the city and there's hustle and bustle, crime, etc. So forth. Let's get out of here, right? Let's get out of this hustle and bustle and live among people like myself. And we created large acres of neighborhoods of homogeneity in terms of use, in terms of income, race, and everything. That's exact opposite of self-sufficiency. So we need a shift in the way we're thinking. I don't like my neighbor. Well, in the future, you may not have the luxury to say that because your life will depend on your neighbor. If we make that shift in the way we think, all of a sudden, we're going to be much more tolerant about what is allowed my next door. I don't care if they put a grocery store, it's good. I want it there. But no, what about parking? They're gonna park in front of my property. That's the attitude we have, and that's one of the biggest cultural impediments right now, intolerance. We need to learn how to tolerate so that we can create self-sufficient and very diverse neighborhoods. That's resilient. That's adaptive. Thanks.
I think so similar. I've got a lot too, but the theme I'm going to go with to go down a few is business as usual. I think at all levels of government and in society, we're used to doing things that we've always done, and it's hard to break out of that, but we need to do that. So my first impediment is that I think that we really need to overcome is we say, right, follow the money. And we've got a huge amount of money from the fossil fuel industry and from conservative right-wing think tanks that are going to influence politics. And those are helping to bring on climate skepticism, disinformation, and they are influencing Congress in this way. We were dealing with not being able to say climate change in the 80s and 90s and then again in 2010. And now we're seeing it again. They want to rename this bill, NCARS, and take climate out of it. I mean, so we have to follow the money. We have to hold fossil fuel industry accountable for their role in climate change. I would also say regarding business as usual and talking about following up on grants. There are a lot of less resourced, low resourced, tribal communities, et cetera, that don't have the ability and the staff and the science, et cetera, to apply for grants, right? So we need to be thinking about, are these two big infrastructure bills really going to be getting the money where it needs to go? So the good news is the administration has pulled together specialists and experts and people who are really focused on environmental justice and equity, and they've got a mapping tool, and they're thinking about different ways and making sure that money is going towards the less resourced. And so you probably may have heard that the Biden administration has an initiative called Justice 40. And so the goal of Justice 40 is to be sure that 40% of some of the federal funding, of certain federal funds, go towards these lower resourced communities and to be more equitable. So it's going to be following that, making sure the administration is doing this and doing this in a equitable fashion. I also want to get to, so that was talking about grants, and then I also wanted to get to the local level. And so, planning is at the local level. And that's also politics, right? And we can't really adapt unless we're seeing some good zoning. And that means, zoning where building is going. And the builders really want to continue business as usual, and they don't want to build and be told to build to certain standards that are going to make a building more resilient to storms, to wind, to sea level rise, building it higher, et cetera, because it's going to cost more money. So we really need to get over this. And the good news is, again, is the Biden administration has initiative on building codes to really push this issue and try to get it, more out there and implemented, because it seems so boring, right? Building codes, but it's really critical on our resilience and adaptation.
So as a panel, would you like to continue this discussion? Are there things that have been said here that anyone would like to follow up on? We do have a little pile of questions, but this seems like a very productive kind of topic here.
I'm getting paid by the word. So you'll hear me again. I think, what I'm seeing in my lifetime, I'm 59 years old now, and I've seen, I think, progress in terms of recognizing possibly the importance of Indigenous people, Indigenous knowledges in all this work. In some ways, so I work at 4 different levels. I work at the global, national, regional, local level. And I mentioned that I was in New York City a couple weeks ago for the UN summit. And, I saw people from all over these different countries and organizations come up to me when I gave my remarks about the importance of Indigenous people and our knowledges, because I don't separate them. I don't separate people from their knowledge in terms of Indigenous people. They're one and the same. And so I'm wondering what that means, right? I mean, we live in a real world too. Like, people can just say that, right? Oh, they're important, you're important. But as she mentioned about politics and money and funding and business as usual, I mean, there's and even justice things, right? And then we think about in terms of other kinds of issues that Indigenous people face. Again, in my lifetime, if you follow the boarding school things that happen in Canada, and so those kind of things elevate the Indigenous people, right? We kind of forget about it. Let's be honest, right? Do you see very much of us in Boulder? Maybe, maybe not. Or if you work with Indigenous people, well, maybe not. But the world is big, it's fast, it's complex, right? I was in New York City. I couldn't even keep up with the people walking on the sidewalk. People are busy, right? Or doing their thing, right? I'm not judging them. I'm just saying that's what I saw. So, working with us, understanding us to develop the solution to climate change, it's a lot harder than just saying, we value you, we want your knowledge, and we want to work with you to make a better world. Again, I look back at this idea of intergenerational knowledge, right? I was teasing the last panel. I had a group of elders in front here, and I look at them, and I think about, what do they know? They have an experience, they have a knowledge, they have a worldview. What are we doing really to bring those things in as well? And I think Indigenous people value the intergenerational knowledge model, if you will, and I think if we don't begin to elevate that as well, each generation passes, right? The COVID-19, for instance, really hammered our people and our elders, our vulnerable people, our knowledge holders. They're gone because of COVID. And so to me, yes, I'm patient in a way about advancing these things with science and traditional knowledge. The other part of me is impatient as well, because I look at our elders and say, are we doing the best we can to engage with them in a respectful, responsible, reciprocal way, in an honorable way? And what they want to share with us, is that for the world? And my final comment would be is Lakota people, again, have always been very kind of open with who we are in our culture and our spirituality. And we have leaders who travel the world every day to speak like this and share what we know and how we see the world. And a lot of it is prophetic in a way, right? They're talking about the future and what they see. And so I think that, us as humanity, we have certainly a lot of challenges that are before us. My hope, again, is that the Indigenous people are at the table. We're not on the menu. We're at the table. And we look at things like the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. Google that, even though it's going to cost money to do it. But it's important because that document, that declaration, tells how we see how we want to be treated and recognize our rights as landholders and water right holders, and also in our cultural heritage. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So we have a number of questions that have come up, and I'd like a couple people to address similar questions, which is basically what can we do as individuals? So at the individual level, I think everybody wants to make a difference when it comes to these big issues of climate change. Are there anything that pops to mind that you can share with this group?
I can jump in, and really I'm just sort of echoing something I've heard from other climate scientists, particularly folks like Catherine Hayhoe, and that is that, and she argues that one of the biggest things we can do is to talk about it, to talk about it with other people, and particularly people who may not be used to talking about it, just to build that sort of awareness and understanding and momentum around action. I mean, and of course there's tangible actions you can also take around, what we eat, how we travel, those sorts of things. But anyway, that resonated with me, so I just wanted to share that.
Good.
I guess I would say, our organization is an advocacy organization, so, we really care about people voting, getting people into decision-making places that understand the climate problem. We're in a climate crisis, so we really need to quote the UN General Secretary, we need everything everywhere all at once to really fight this fight to roll back, or not, we can't roll back, but to make some progress. And so, anything we do from the local to the federal level is critical. I love the idea of just talking about it, but we need to vote. We really need action, and I think anything you can do at the local level, I think basically following your passion. If you're more concerned about the local level, do it there. If you more passionate about state or federal, it all makes a difference, right? And so I would just let you know that anyone can go to our website and find resources. We have quite a few members and supporters, so we're often not often, too often, but we send out action alerts to get people to write in to their legislator and things like that. So sometimes it's actually not that, doesn't take too much effort to do things like that, because there are a lot of organizations like mine that are doing the analysis of certain bills or what have you, and following the different steps, et cetera. So getting involved in a nonprofit organization can be an easier way to do advocacy.
Well, yeah, so I really, just to recap before you mention, what I really like about these answers so far is it's action in whatever you're good at or passionate about, doesn't matter which, and then patience, because things take time, and they take way more time than most of us have patience for. So it's important going into these things to recognize that it's important to do something and to be a role model and continue that. So we've had a number of other questions that have come in from folks. Korkut, do you want to speak to those?
I want to answer first your question as an individual. As a planner, I look at different scales. What can federal government, state government do, local government? neighborhood, me, what can we do as persons to make our lives more resilient? Diversify. Don't have just one job, work for 50 hours and have a big mortgage, because you lose your job, you lose your house, you lose your life, basically. Diversify. We learned this in the crisis, we learned this in the COVID-19. Get a secondary business of your own. Produce food on your community. Produce energy on your property. You can do that. There are technologies. Don't depend on others. And you can create networks in your community to bring powers together and get these in the neighborhood scale, in the block scale, in few houses scale, share them. That's my personal advice to the people.
You know, for me, it's pretty simple. It's to care. You know, how much do we care about? How much do we care about the planet? How much do we care about one another? As fundamental as that.
It's directly relevant.
Question is how to get more people to care. That was prophetic, right? I said it, and then I got a question to it. Do you want?
You take it.
Boy, it's a hard one too, right? But I can say that easily, right? You should just care about things. But for us as Indigenous people, and I'm going to be a little generalized here, but we're from the beginning, we're taught that we're part of a community. I use the word we have is midakuya oyasi in the Lakota way. It's all my relations. We start and end our ceremonies, our prayers, our important conversations with midakuya oyasi. It reminds us again every day about our connection to everything around us. It strengthens those connections by acknowledging it both in our heart, in our mind, our soul, and in our voice. Carries our voice, right? That's our prayer. It means to carry the voice out. I think one thing is to work with us, Indigenous people. I got to tell the story about youth. Have you guys heard about the Dakota Access Pipeline? Raise your hands if you ever heard about the Dakota Access Pipeline. Did you know that was started by a young woman, a young Lakota woman from Standing Rock? I met her. I shook hands with her. I didn't know that story, but I shook hands. I met her. They told me the story. How she asked a question, right? Why are they doing this pipeline? Why is it doing it here instead of up north in Bismarck? Why are they doing it right here by our reservation? And she says, who's doing something about it? Our tribal leaders? Our tribal elders? What are you guys doing? Nobody could give a response to her. So she says, you know what I'm going to do? I want to write a letter, and I want to hand deliver it to the Corps of Engineers General in Omaha, Nebraska. Standing Rock, Omaha, Nebraska. How many miles do you think that is? Where's my geographers here? It's a long place, right? And then she said, I don't have any money. My family doesn't have any money. How are we going to do? I want to run. I want to run and take this letter to that general and hand it to him and say, ask him these questions. But she started a movement, right? You know what happened with that, right? All these people around the world came. They came. And so there's something about Indigenous people, something about this land, to awaken. To care is to awaken, I think. To reconnect with the land again. Each one of us are Indigenous to some place. And I was inspired by that young lady. I couldn't say much to her because she's this upcoming leader. And she didn't let those things stop her. She did it, and she completed that run, and then she had all the young people wanting to follow her. I want to be part of it. I want to be part of it. So it can start with one person, and start with the community like you. I know Boulder, do you know Boulder has something called Right Relationships? Right? I'm aware of those leaders there. They're trying. And I think we got to close that gap between our understanding of one another as human beings. Indigenous people. And we'll do our part, you do your part, and let's see what we can do together. Thank you.
So I think you guys have heard of, maybe, I don't remember who said this, but that climate change is a wicked problem. And I feel like I have two wicked questions. So I'm going to do my best at this. I'm going to take maybe the hardest first. I don't know. But the question is about, it's a very good question. I think a lot of us probably think about this a lot. It's about war and how war causes climate change. So it's asking about, the fuel that goes into the jets, into the tanks, et cetera. And then it cuts, like how are we going to cut down on the emissions of all of the contributions that military has to the climate change crisis, and then about nuclear arms race and the really terrible, horrific situation in Ukraine, and how nuclear war can do so much damage. So this is a really amazing question. I can say that the good news first of all, yes, the military does have a huge carbon footprint. I don't know the stats on that, but yes. But what I can say is that the good news is that the administration and the military, they understand climate change. And it's woven throughout a lot of the different documents that they have, a lot of different management protocols, et cetera. And so, the military is chain of command, so that's good. If somebody above them says, the general says, you got to focus on climate change, they're going to do it. And we have done a little bit of work in the military area in the sense of trying to bring along the skeptics, right? And thinking, if we can bring conservatives along and understanding the impacts to the military from climate change, and maybe we can say, okay, how you can fix that is through emissions reduction. So I do have a little bit of background in understanding what the Department of Defense is doing on climate impacts, and so we've gotten some good pieces of policy in the last few National Defense Authorization Acts, so that the military, when they do build, they're building above the flood level, and that they can help use their resources regarding resilience, not only on their footprint, but within the community, because the community and the bases are so intertwined, right? But that's not getting at, I think, the point of this question, which is emissions, right? I think that a few different administrations have been very clear on trying to, push technology forward on how to do that. So I don't have an answer for you, but it's called the Green Fleet. They're thinking about how to do this. And so I guess it's one of those things we have to stay tuned to. We do have a program under the Union of Concerned Scientists on nuclear proliferation. So if you are really concerned about that, please just Google it, and it'll come up, and you can follow some of the work we're doing. But we care about it a lot. We were founded 50 years ago, and that was one of the key points that the MIT professors focused on. And the next question, should we wait for, or?
Go ahead. Yeah, I think it's related enough.
This 1992, I don't know, that might have been before we had the internet. I'm not sure. So how can we explain that the work that we did called Urgent Warning to Humanity never made it to the news, to the New York Times? And that was before my time, but I think that, this kind of challenges we faced back then, we're still facing. It's a little bit easier today with, I joked about the internet, but it is a lot easier today. I remember hearing from my colleagues where, they had stacks of paper and were joking about how they had to fax things back and forth to different offices. So it's much faster now, and I can't explain it, so I'm sorry for that. I hope those answers are helpful.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. Did another question travel down there?
It did, yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I can give you a minute. Okay. So as she ponders that question.
Yeah, I can go for
ahead.
it.
Okay.
Okay, so the question is about, so I was kind of talking about building codes and how it does impact housing costs, right? And so how do we reconcile the fact that we have a housing crisis? Yes, we do. And how are we going to handle the building the way we want to build that's resilient and that it's going to cost more? There are some really great organizations that are working on this, that we're working with, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, for example. But this is one of the impediments that I didn't mention, which is the benefit cost analysis. Again, it makes my eyes go in the back of my head because I'm not an economist, but I work with an economist, and this is how all the federal money goes out, is you have to have a positive benefit cost analysis. And most of the time, the way the federal agencies use this is outdated. So when we're thinking about climate change, we're thinking about impacts. Well, guess what? We're not going to see the benefits until a few years, right? The good news is that the National Institute for Building Sciences has done work to look at, well, what is that benefit? Well, guess what? Building above the flood level, if you're in a riverine area, saves money down the road. Can be $4 to $6 in the reduction of future damages. So every dollar can save anywhere between $4 to $6 of, not having to have those damages. And so we're an impatient society, right? I think there are funds, I believe, in both the infrastructure bills to help do this. I think there can be creative ways to get resources to do this as well. There are states that, and I think cities that have infrastructure banks. So this is one kind of model that can help do that.
Okay, great. I think we have about 5 minutes before we need to let you all get to your next panel. And a question came in that I think everyone would be interested in speaking to. So we've been talking at individual levels and local levels. And then the question is essentially how to coordinate all of these small dispersed groups for larger action, on behalf of the country, on behalf of global considerations. And so maybe everybody could just speak just a couple minutes to that, and we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Very quickly, since we don't have a lot of time, we came up with this proposal. It's a federal level act, and it's in www.hyperlocalurbanism.com. That's that level of scale. And then I just want to very quickly mention as well, right now there's the Bill 213 in the Senate, Colorado Senate. That is a very important forward step, in my opinion, to really get out of this most vulnerable urban pattern, but provide more housing, middle housing, moderate income housing, and diversify our urban environment. So how do we organize? We need to have some enabling acts in the stable and state and federal levels, in my opinion. Thanks.
First of all, I just sort of want to thank all the organizers. This is the 75th anniversary. It's kind of cool to be on this panel here with you all, and I want to thank you for all that, who's all been involved in that. I had there's a mentor of mine by the name of Vine Deloria Jr. You might have heard of him. He used to work here, and we were talking about all these different groups of people doing different things, similar things, and why they wouldn't talk to each other. They wouldn't work with each other. They wouldn't collaborate. And he said, you know what we need, James? We need a National Association of Associations. I love that. I use that to this point. I use it every day because we do struggle, right? We do struggle to work together, and I understand that, right? I mean, if we're funded by a certain entity for a certain thing, then we do that. Or if we're good at one thing, we do that. But I do think that I'm always interested in how. I'm not an AI guy, a big machine learning guy, but I was interested in how these platforms that we have now that we can use to talk. I mean, even 3 years ago, we never knew what Zoom was. And now it's becoming part of our popular culture now. Let's Zoom, let's Zoom, let's do Zoom. So I do think that, well, I'm a believer in networks anyway. I believe in the power of networks. I've seen networks work. I'm kind of here because of a network. And if I could do good work again for the rest of my life, I certainly want to use networks and be part of networks that do that. I think networks are powerful. You know, if you imagine, you know, there's a web, there's webs of knowledges now across the world that we have and we can share, and we just need an internet access. And I know that's another issue, but I do think that we have to always figure out better ways to connect, stay connected, and in those connections that we do good things. So, thank you.
I'm just going to say one quick example that I really love, and I believe it's called the Southeast Florida Climate Change Compact. So this is different cities and counties that have gotten together to work on climate change. And what's great about that is that some have a little more resources and more tax base that they can pull on, and may have more staff than others in that area. And so they've pulled together to come up with climate change solutions on the mitigation and adaptations side. And I think that's something that could be replicated.
Yeah, and just quickly, I think we've been touching on the institutional structures, whether it's sort of regional hubs or whatever they might be, to sort of get the work done in sort of cohesive regional ways. But I think there's also the incentive structures. So incentivizing sort of not only the localized adaptation work that needs to be done, whether you're a scientist or a planner or whatever that might be, whether that's in academia or in other spheres, but incentivizing that work and then having those institutional structures so that the people doing that local work can share their experiences, sort of roll it up, and share with others that are doing that kind of work across regions and across the country. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Well, these are incredibly inspirational ideas. Please join me in thanking this amazing panel.
Good to see you again.
You too.
Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs, and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.